Okay, causality. How do we know that two things are a cause and effect? There are three suggestions I can encourage you to consider. First, covariance. Are the two things related? That's what we've been talking about. We usually are going to see a correlation and say that two things are causally related. So if you have a correlation, that's some evidence. It's not all the evidence you need, but that's some evidence. So couples who met online have better marriages. Maybe meeting online improves your marriage, but maybe it doesn't. We just know that we have one check mark here. Next up, internal validity. What am I talking about here? Can you think of another thing that could cause people to have better marriages if they met online? So that's the one example or the set of examples we were talking about in the previous video. So if you have what could cause people to both go online more and to have more marital happiness, maybe people who have more free time have more time to go online and they have more time to spend with their spouse, so they have more happy relationships. And the reason we want to think about alternative explanations is if whenever you want to say that there is a causal relationship between two variables, what you should do is not look to prove, but look to disprove. Can you find any evidence that shows that causal relation is false? In science, we do not look to prove things true. Instead, we try really, really hard to prove things false. And if we can't prove something false, we have to say that it is true. That's why we talk about gravity only being a theory. We can't prove that our understanding, our mathematical understanding of gravity is how gravity works. It's a pretty dang good guess because we haven't been able to prove that the math behind gravity is wrong. But maybe there's something we're not aware of. Maybe there's a third variable we haven't considered, and so we never really want to say that it's a fact. We always want to stick with it being a theory. And so maybe having more free time makes you go online more and makes you more maritally happy. Or maybe people who got their spouse online are maritally happy because there's a direct relationship there. I don't know, but I'm always going to try and find alternative solutions and check whether those solutions are true. How would I check this one? Well, I would just see whether people who met their spouse online tend to have more free time. Last one, temporal precedence. Temporal precedence is the idea that if one thing causes another, that thing must happen before the other one. What am I talking about? Well, let's say that you think that people who meet online have better marital happiness. Well, you might ask yourself this question. Did they do they have did they have better marital happiness because they met online? Or do they have more marital happiness and therefore they met online? That is confusing. How could it possibly be that somebody uh, has more marital happiness and therefore met online? There has to be a temporal precedent there. Well, yes, that is confusing. But let me give you an alternative example. Maybe people who have more free time tend to go online more. Or maybe people who tend to go online more tend to have more free time because they take care of their responsibilities online instead of writing letters and going to the bank in person. If you could have a causality problem with a multiple set of issues, not just a third variable issue, but also a temporal precedence issue. Temporal precedence is one of those things that seems super, super obvious. Of course, if one thing causes another, then duh, uh, the cause had to come before the effect. But it's super easy to fall into the trap of assuming that one thing always came before the other because you see the correlation there. And so the best way to deal with this is to just perform an experiment. Perform an experiment where you artificially make one thing disappear or artificially do one thing to see if the other one happens. Now, these are some complicated topics and they are kind of confusing. So I've gone ahead and put just a couple practice questions here at the end of this video to use the time a little bit more effectively and to give you guys a chance to practice the information here. So this is not required for you to see, but if you want to get a bit of practice working with this information, here you go. You notice that every time you see Mary at a party, you don't see Doug. You take notes about when Mary and Doug are present at parties. What sort of study would this be? Are we gathering correlational data or experimental data? Well, you're not performing an experiment here, are you? You're just gathering data about what you see. So that's going to be correlational data. That's going to be from a correlational study. Same question, or same premise, different question. You notice that every time you see Mary at a party, you don't see Doug. You take notes about when Mary and Doug are present at parties. What sort of data is this? Are we demonstrating a causal relationship or a correlational relationship? Well, you haven't performed an experiment, so you can't say that Doug is avoiding Mary or Mary is avoiding Doug. You can't say that Mary is the cause of Doug or that Doug is the cause of Mary. So you've got correlational data here. How would you turn this into an experiment? How would you turn this into a causal set of data? Well, what you could do is start inviting Mary and Doug to parties independently. Arrive to a party with Mary and see whether Doug leaves, or maybe just talk to them. Let's think about this last one here. Could there be a third variable issue? Could there be a situation where Mary is never going to be at a party that Doug's at? Maybe it's not that Mary is avoiding Doug or that Doug is avoiding Mary. Maybe it's that Mary works on Saturdays and Doug works on Sundays, and so if you only go to parties on Saturdays and Sundays, you're never going to see Mary and Doug together. Can you think of any other third variables for this situation? Any good scientist is going to constantly look for alternative explanations for things. If you see interesting bits of research on the news or on TV, if someone tells you that two things are related, you should always ask yourself, could there be another explanation for this that makes more sense? And if there is, maybe you should be careful about assuming the relationship that you've got there. And I've already asked you to make this an experimental study, so you've had your chance there. I know this says raise your hands. If you're at home, you don't have to raise your hand. I just use this for in-class teaching as well, so don't worry about that. Lastly, we've got our vocabulary for this week. Not too many of them, and most of them are pretty straightforward now that we've talked about them. I hope you have a wonderful week. I want you to know that I'm so glad you've been my student, and if you have any questions for me, if you have any questions, concerns, or comments, or complaints, or cries of indignation, you are always more than welcome to contact me via email. I'm at scienzg@otc.edu, SAENZG@otc.edu. Thank you and have a wonderful day.